Enacting Paulo Freire in an Institutional Context, Developing Positive Relationships with Carol Thompson and Michael Klein. Here are the instructors of the class. That would be Michael on the right, and I'm on the left. Michael Klein is a professor in rhetoric and writing at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And Carol, that's me, is a professor in the Department of Applied Communication. We teach a class together called Rhetoric and Communication. Our course design includes encouraging inclusive discourse through speaking and writing, listening and reading. Together, we experienced Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. The students' positive response to that text led us to develop Freire's ideas of a liberating pedagogy within our institutional context. This in turn led to profound learning, both for Michael and me and the students, based on critical assessment of powerful ideas. We allow our students' investigations and insights to lead our own new vision of knowledge and what it can do for society as they envision it. There are two types of teaching, and if you're familiar with Paulo Freire, you know that there are two types that he discusses in his book. And the first is the banking method, where students are vessels and we as instructors are paid to fill them with knowledge. The other, of course, is the dialogical method, where students and instructors are co-equal partners in the construction of what counts as knowledge in the classroom. Students and faculty are urged to participate in authentic dialogue, which would involve deep listening, thoughtful responses. It also involves humility, because if I'm going to listen to you and not burst in with my own thoughts and ideas, it takes a modicum of humility to be able to do that, and to allow the dialogue to develop organically. Both Freire and Michael and I owe a debt to Martin Buber, philosopher and theologian, whose primary text, I and Thou, described our perceptions of other human beings to be divided into two different patterns, the I-it pattern and the I-thou pattern. So to see another as an it is to see that person as an object to be used. To see that person as a thou is to see that person as the very one that we are. Michael and I made the shift to encountering our students as thous. This is no easy task, because students who expect us to be using the banking method of communication, students must also respond to this shift that Michael and I made in our teaching. Freire's work implies an existential framework where students and instructors believe they are personally responsible for co-constructing what happens in the classroom, for contributing to the climate of discovery, for recognizing that their lives are driven by choices and that decisions have consequences. Buber's thinking figures heavily in Freire's work, and Freire does reference Buber in some of his other works as well. In an institution, instructors are given several tasks. They must, among other things, provide a syllabus, provide a schedule of classes, select course texts and other materials, plan for classroom activities, assign progress grades and summative grades, keep track of students, who's present, who's not, lecture, talk about the content, develop fully designed speaking and small group assignments, develop other fully designed writing assignments. They also have to respond to students' writing and their speaking. They provide technical equipment for speaking assignments. They ensure the class corresponds to the appropriate time frame each day, each week, and a host of other things. This list is not exhaustive by any means. The corrective, we found, is a liberatory pedagogy, which might include, number one, a dialogical focus, which is, of course, deep learning, the humility. We described it earlier, a dialogical focus. It should be intersubjective, relationships between students and faculty. Pedagogy is enacted from the bottom up and not the top down. We acknowledge there is a co-construction of relationships and a co-construction of how we view knowledge. Other voices join Freire's approach include John Dewey, who is a pioneer in the idea of social construction. That knowledge was the product of symbolization, therefore of discourse, because as you know, discourse is a way we symbolize our thoughts and feelings to give them to another human being. Knowledge virtually co-constructed with active listening and lively discourse. The school then becomes a community and not a rigid institutional structure. Freire's works, including School and Society and Democracy and Education, argue that schools should prepare students to enter a civil society. And we would also argue that schools should prepare students to become ethical beings as well. Other voices that join Freire's approach include Lev Vygotsky. He studied the conceptual processes of children endeavoring to solve problems, and he came up with the idea of zone of proximal development, or ZOPED. Two circles represent zones. One is the experiential domain of the learner with little to do with banking. The other is scientific or adult knowledge that has everything to do with banking. The intersection of these zones, according to Vygotsky, is where learning happens. Together, Vygotsky and Dewey supplement our notion of a liberatory pedagogy. They bring us the idea of blending pedagogies, which suggest how Freire might be imported into an institutional context. Ideally, students in our classes would engage in a completely liberatory approach to literacy-based education. But we fear that the problem-posing approach would fail in our institution. We have constraints, after all. We assign grades, push students to do revisions, we require attendance, and so on. So how do we accomplish this? Epistemological pedagogy. Epistemology, as most of you know, is a branch of philosophy that explores how we know what we know. And we ask what kind of environment then enhances the pedagogy we are seeking, that shapes how we know what we know. Environment, it should be an environment not dominated by power figures. That includes Michael and me. Environment that encourages the role of discourse in the construction of knowledge, where class becomes a place of active discourse. Both faculty and students refuse to privilege only banking discourse. Liberatory teachers bracket or set aside their own ideology to engage in authentic discussion with students. Authentic discussion, and Dewey and Vygotsky, we think, would agree, would include banking moves. Yes, it would include banking moves on the part of the instructors. In other words, some sharing of knowledge on a particular subject where we have spent over 20 years developing our understanding of some of these ideas. So that would be valuable. So it should include some banking moves, but it would also, and more importantly, acknowledge the experiential authority of students, and it would acknowledge the instructor's knowledge as well. In the end, despite its vestiges of its institutional authority, knowledge would be co-constructed by students and teachers. So what would the classroom look like if we enacted the strategy? Well, teachers and students engaged actively in the co-construction of knowledge. That knowledge should grow from the text and the communication we're analyzing. Everyone should have a part. Through free-flowing dialogue where all would present arguments, counter-arguments, examples, instances, experience, evidence, verbal and textual, we would find a truth emerges for the group. So enacting the strategy, role for reversals. Students would sometimes become teachers. Teachers would sometimes become students. Michael and I have done this. Perhaps faculty could submit one of their papers in progress or rejected papers for class analysis. Michael and I have done this, and it's very scary. Perhaps faculty could write the assignments along with the students, which is a powerful way to diminish status differences. Writing, discussion, and attendance would be required, but the dynamic would be decidedly relational. When we do this, the teacher-student binary is undermined as we engage in dialogue with our students. Asking students to use their first names, no title. Flexibility rather than rigidity would be the norm. Mutual respect and positive communication. So enacting the strategy, the characteristics of the space, discovery and creativity as well as critical thinking, of course, would be valued. We would work to include every single voice in the class, going around the room from person to person, asking for volunteers who then ask other members of the class to respond. Have students discuss the idea with the person next to him or her first and then respond. And always encourage silent or shy people to talk. I was one of those silent or shy individuals when I was in school, so I know how important it is to try to get them to talk. Responses to the text and topics would not be evaluated in terms of correctness. We would stress relational and effective discussion and writing, and comments would focus on what is positive, for example, about a paper, and areas of concern would be framed positively. For example, you've made a good start analyzing the text. You might look further in areas where we became confused, and that would be Michael and me because we both comment on the paper, and rework the phrasing in those places. You have the makings of a terrific paper, can't wait to see the final copy. You can say this about almost any paper that you read. Enacting the strategy. Part of it is establishing an open space, create a positive climate, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. Faculty and students openly encourage all to participate honestly and openly. Encourage to teach. Parker Palmer discloses the space where learning occurs, and this space must be bounded and open. Faculty must engender the freedom to be open, to explore the journey that creates a full and deep understanding of the ideas, concepts, and the material they are encouraging. This is Parker Palmer on the slide, and he has a quote that we've included here. Some journeys are direct, some are circuitous, some are heroic, some are fearful and muddled, but every journey, honestly undertaken, stands a chance of taking us toward the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need. And I think that kind of encapsulates what we hope to do with our journeys in class. Enacting the strategy, Palmer discusses the space being hospitable and charged, where students are free to interact. All voices heard in a space rendered safe by ground rules that encourage attitudes of acceptance. In this space, there is room for authentic voices, but also a space where the group can question, affirm, challenge, and co-create. On the left side of the slide, you will see a quote from Parker Palmer again, and you'll probably recognize the great Frida Kahlo, the artist, is one of the images here. And he says the human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed, to be seen, heard, and championed exactly as it is. So Parker Palmer also envisions a space to include smaller, individual, heartfelt stories of each person, as well as the larger disciplinary and more universal contributions. All of these stories, even the silences, contribute to the ultimate climate of growth and learning. And now we're going to add one more approach to all of this. Theorist Julian MIRIVEL developed a model that describes communication that tends to open the lines of discourse within a variety of settings, not only education, but that often leads to deeper and more authentic dialogue, even within the educational context. The model includes the communication of processes and forms which we would be proud to model and to teach to children. This model reflects our human potential. It includes behaviors that challenge us to move in the direction of others and to act ethically. So this is the MIRIVEL model, the art of positive communication. It highlights behaviors that lead to positive interactions with students and others. It shows behaviors to enact as we endeavor to create strong relationships in positive environments that invite creativity, critical thinking, and intelligent thought. The MIRIVEL model, greeting, it begins with something simple but incredibly important and often overlooked. Greeting bridges the divide among human beings and opens the way for communication. You cannot go deeply into communication without starting first with the greeting, with an opening, with something that says, yes, I embrace you, let's talk. To greet a student with his or her name and a positive attitude suggests something worthwhile is about to happen in this interaction. It signals that the instructor cares about the student. The MIRIVEL model, asking questions for someone to explain, to argue, describe, quick starts the relationship as we seek to uncover what is known and unknown about ourselves and others. Instead of talking for the 50-minute classroom, thoughtful questions might allow student engagement and participation and student buy-in to what we're trying to do in the classroom. The MIRIVEL model, complimenting. Complimenting, that is positive remarks that work to affect the sense of self. In this sense, it's demonstrating the idea, essentially, of the looking glass self explained by Charles Horton Cooley at the beginning of the 20th century, where who we believe ourselves to be is developed from the input reflected back to us from other people. And if we receive compliments when we do a good job or some other positive remark, that's going to affect who we think we are as human beings. And it gives students the courage to contribute in the classroom. It builds self-esteem. The MIRIVEL model, disclosing. Mutual disclosure can bring students and faculty together. For example, saying, I don't know, in front of a class is an important milestone for instructors who are trained and thought to be experts in their fields, and they find it difficult to admit the possibility that they do not know everything. Giving the instructors papers to read is also an act of disclosure. When you say, this is a problem I had writing this paper, or I'm still working on this part, and I'd hope you would look at that more closely. Now, we have to give a caveat. Disclosure, of course, should be appropriate. For example, personal disclosure about your personal life might go too far. The MIRIVEL model, encouraging. Encouraging is powerful. Writing positive comments on papers about performances or experiments or to the class as a whole creates a positive climate overall where students believe they can succeed, where they believe they are valued. So encourage where you can legitimately encourage. Don't make things up. There's always something positive you can find. I say a lot of times it's a good start, or you've created a good outline. Now fill it in. I'm happy you've started this project. Let's work on a timeline. So there are always ways that you can positively encourage someone. This doesn't mean that you don't address areas of concern or challenges in the paper. You do that, but you work through that when it's interlaced with encouragement. The MIRIVEL model, listening. Listening is a powerful motivator and creates an atmosphere of positivity. With listening, we understand someone else. We learn about his or her ideas in depth. And for us, it's also an act of humility, and we've mentioned this before. If I will give you my time to listen, that means I'm going to focus on you. That means I will not be paying attention to myself and how I look and how I feel. I'll be looking at you and feeling with you. That's what true listening, authentic listening is. The person who is listened to grows in internal stature and feels valued. And it enables us, according to the MIRIVEL model, to transcend our differences as human beings. So we're not sure we fully address the paradox that's lurking in the phrase liberatory pedagogy in an institutional context. However, we've endeavored to join important voices such as Freire, Dewey, Buber, Vygotsky, MIRIVEL in a dialogical examination of the paradox. We provided a few tentative ideas about how to both understand and address this paradox. And we hope perhaps we've opened a dialogue. In the most positive spirit, we realize we cannot avoid institutional realities. However, incorporating some of the practical behaviors we've cited from Parker Palmer's idea of space, the ideas of MIRIVEL, and others, we can endeavor to respect deeply the subjectivities, the differences we encounter when we are engaged in dialogue with others. The implication of this work for education is, we believe, profound. Finally, embedded in this profundity is the recognition that every instructor, by virtue of simply wanting to develop a liberatory classroom, by strength of will, can enact positive behaviors. Our seminal element in designing this classroom is this: respecting the students. The students are not broken. We have to learn to deal with them where they are. And even loving the students. Insofar as teachers and students both avoid the kind of objectification that Freire critiques, they just might come together in a community of democratic and constructive learning.